Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Last time we did a video on an unlisted number of tips to cut a tenon. And a lot of you said, well, a tenon is only half the story. So today we're going to do less than one tip on how to cut a mortise. So when it actually comes time to cut the mortise, we need to understand a few things, and that's where tip number 0 is going to come in. On this, you have a reference side. And on this, you're going to have a reference side. You need to make sure the reference side on both of them is on the same side of the board. Because when this goes in, you want this face to be flush with this face. Unless you don't want it to be flush, in which case then, well, erase that. Where that is important is I laid out this tenon with a marking gauge. And the fence of the marking gauge was on one side of the board, referencing that side of the board. If I referenced this side of this board, and I referenced the other side of the other board, that means my tenon could move in and out on this board. But if I reference the same side on both boards, I can get the exact same marks on this board that I put onto this board. Tip number 0.00001, use a marking knife. Good pencils are useful, but there's a thickness to that line, and you don't know if you want to cut on one side of the line, in the middle of the line, or the other line, and pencils just aren't quite as accurate. The more accurate you can get your first cut, the more accurate everything else is going to be. The nice thing about a knife, it is the first cut of the saw. Everything on one side of the cut goes, everything on the other side of the cut stays, and it's an infinitely small mark. Tip number pi divided by 4, use tape. This is actually kind of fun because it makes all of your marks far more visible. Now I want to make sure my tape isn't on my reference side of the wood because I still need to reference that with my marking gauge. But if I put some tape on there, now any marks I make, I'm going to actually make a very visible line in the tape. Tip number 4, -5. Use reality to mark out where you want it to be. If I want this to be flush at the end, I'm going to flush it up with my finger, and then I'm going to use my knife, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to mark this side of the tenon, and I'm going to mark this side of the tenon. I used reality to mark it rather than measuring the tenon and then bringing it out here to try and get an accurate mark. If I put reality on here, I'm going to get a deadly accurate to the width here. I could try and do the same thing here, but this is a lot harder to hold on. And hey, look at that. Our marking gauge was set up precisely to this, and as long as we reference the right side, we can then use the marking gauge to come in and slice our tape. Now we have a good line on there, and it's cut through the tape. Or it tried to cut through the tape. Then we can put our knife into that mark that we made earlier, slide the square up against it, and then put a few light cuts on here. And this, we know, is exactly where we want this to be. We can cut this out precisely, and we can get exactly what we want. Now, if we're just doing a partial tenon that only goes halfway through, that's all we need. If we want it to wrap around the other side, we have to transfer these marks around. So with the square, I can put my knife in here, slide it up against there. I'm going to put a little tiny nick mark on this corner, grab a bigger square, again, put the knife in that tick mark, slide this up against it, put another tick mark on this corner, and then lift it up. And then with it up on the other side, we have the tick mark here. We can put this in, slide this up against it, make our mark here, and because our reference surface is over on this side, grab the marking gauge, and we can mark out our lines here. And we know that these lines are going to be exactly the same as this line. We know that these marks are going to be in the same amount of the board because we're referencing the same side of the board. We know the marks are going to be this way because we've drawn them all the way around the board. But in this case, we're only going that far in, so we don't need the marks on the side. And now for the age-old question, do I drill or do I chop? And if I chop, do I use a mortising chisel or a bench chisel? Yeah, lots of questions here. If I'm intending on cutting a mortise that is larger than 3/8, I almost always drill it out. If it's smaller than 3/8, I almost always chop it out. And because I have a mortising chisel for 1/4 and a 3/8, I'm usually going to use a mortising chisel because it's a little bit stiffer and it's easier. But if I don't have this, this works perfectly fine. You have no reason to go buy a mortising chisel. But if you have it, then might as well use it. But honestly, the difference between these is rather slim. You just have to be a little more careful when you're using a bench chisel that you don't bend it. With a mortising chisel, you're not going to bend that. But in this case, I'm going 3/8. So do I drill it or do I chop it? I'm going to do a little of both because I'm teaching. But most of the time with 3/8, as long as I'm not going much more than 1 inch or 2, I'm going to just chop it. It's fast, it's easy, it's simple. The problem with narrow mortises is you have to drill a whole bunch of holes to get it done, and that takes a lot of time. So sometimes it's just quicker to come in with a chisel and chop it out. But if you're doing a wide mortise, you may only have to drill 1 or 2 or 3 holes. And it's a lot faster to drill those holes than it is to chop out the large amount of space. So go ahead and try both out and see which one you like. I can come in here with this little piece of tape in the middle that we cut out, and we can peel it back and remove that so that we want to remove everything that's in between the tape lines. To just use a bench chisel, I'm not going to start right on the edge, because if I do that, I'm going to crush the fibers, I'm going to push this hole farther back. I'm going to move in about a 1/16 inch or so, grab my mallet and give it one good tap. And then I'm going to move in the bevel side a little farther, and I'm going to do it again. And every one of these I'm going to go in a little bit deeper, and a little deeper, and a little deeper, because I'm shearing off the material on the bevel side. And there, I'm already down 1/2 inch. I can come back in at an angle, pare out all this waste that we just chopped out. You see we're creating this angle going back down in there. Now if you want to see more detail on this method, I definitely say check out Paul Sellers. He has some really good videos on chopping mortises this way. And generally for a mortise like this, where I'm only going down about 1 1/4 inch, and it's a 3/8 wide, I'm probably going to just chop it out like this. It doesn't take very long, and it's surprisingly fun. It's nice to get these chips out. Just make sure you're not levering this. You don't want to bend your chisel. With a mortising chisel, it's basically the exact same thing. It's just easier to hit. There's a lot more force that goes into it. And also, I don't have to worry about levering chips out. I can lift it up a little bit from the bottom, so I'm not scratching the tip, and I can just pry those chips right out. So this is actually really nice, but not necessary. Tip -6, if you're going to use an auger bit, it's good to have a center line so you know if you're moving it side to side. Usually I want to pick an auger bit that is a 1/16 inch smaller. So if it's a 3/8 slot, I'm going to be choosing a 5/16 auger bit for my 3/8 inch slot. Then I'm going to put my marking gauge in the middle of the line, and I'm going to draw a line right down the middle of this so I know where to put the tip of my auger bit. That way I'm not moving off one side or the other. I know exactly where I want it to be. Then I can keep it a little ways away from the outside, put it right into that marking gauge line, and bore it down. Yay! Cranky, 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 cranky. Now we start getting the question of how deep do we want this to go? Well, we want it to go the depth of the tenon. So I'm going to use a little depth gauge on here, put this on, slide it up, and tighten it down. If you want one of these, I have a video on making one. They're really, really simple. It's just a set screw with a rod, and I can set this on here to know I want it to be that deep. I want it actually to be a little bit deeper than this is long. I want a little bit of a void down here at the bottom. Then as I chisel away, I can use this to check my depth, or I can check the holes that I've drilled to see how far down do I need it to go, because I know this is the same length as my tenon. I just go until that reaches the bottom. When using the auger, I can then set this on here, and I can put a piece of tape on to say, I need it to go that far. Putting this flag on here will allow me to know I just drill until that flag touches it. The downside to this is it tends to clog up with junk, and sometimes the flag gets moved around, so you have to be a little careful with it, but it does work very well. I actually like to use these bearing guided depth stops, and so I can check that and make sure that I'm at the right depth that way. These are really nice, quick and easy to use, and well, they're just very, very useful. And now for the boring part. For some reason, this is going a lot faster than I remember. Now that we've drilled out most of the material, I'm going to come in with a slightly larger chisel, in this case a 3/4 inch chisel. I'm going to stay away from that sideline. I'm just going to pare down until it jams without pushing much, just using my hand force to slide it down in. Now if I'm doing a through tenon, I'm going to do this from both sides and try to meet in the middle. Don't ever try to push a through tenon all the way through from one side. You'll just end up with tear out on the other side. But remember, stay away from your lines as long as possible. Once I pare down the sides, I can come in with a thinner chisel and clean out all those. Now I'm not prying, I'm just basically shoveling it out. So I'm not bending this, I'm just scraping down the bottom, cleaning them out a little ways. If it's having problems, this is where a mortise chisel really comes in, because you can do a little prying. Just be careful when prying, don't pry back against this edge. You may end up moving your line farther back. I'm still staying away from the line, but I want to see how close I am. Like here, I still got a little bit more. I'm hitting that before I'm hitting the bottom. But over here, I'm good at depth. Sliding it along here, that's really, really nice. So we're at depth, but we're away from our line on all sides. Now that I'm down to depth, I can go into my marking gauge lines, and I want to put this right into that line, I'm going to keep the chisel vertical and tap, tap, tap. Very light tapping. All the way down to the bottom. And then I'm going to do it the opposite side because I want to make sure this is the right width before I go on any further. Theoretically, it should be the same width as the chisel. So it's still a little tight. I got to take off a little bit more one side or the other. And I can look inside and see where the bruising is. It's on this side here. So that means I need to shave off a little bit more on this side. Then we can test it again. Yeah, that's what I want. We can also bring in the reality of the tenon and see, ooh, that's really nice. We're sliding in right there. That's what I want. So we can pare down both sides up to the ends. Don't touch the ends yet. That's the last thing you do, are the very ends of the mortises. As you find yourself getting closer and closer and closer to your sidewalls and marks, always remember, these marks are gold. Do not ever touch your sidewall marks. Do not ever touch your end wall marks. Do not let these move. Those are the most important part. If you undercut a little bit on the inside, that's not a problem, but don't touch the outside marks. You should be able to stick your chisel in on one side and swing it all the way out, and it should be able to go from one side to the other. Just a little bit of friction here and there. That's what you're looking for. Then, after we know that our thickness is exactly what we want it to be, we're going to put in our chisel halfway to our marking gauge, set it up at 90 degrees, and shear off that excess. Then repeat the process until you have no option but to just go into that marking gauge line, tap it down a little ways, and drive it down. Clean out that excess and you should be good. So let's test reality. It should fit in thickness-wise here, and then it should fit in just like that. And I like it to be to the point where I can almost get it all the way down in, but if I get a mallet, I can tap the rest. There we go. Nice, tight, beautiful joint. If it's all done right, you get a really nice tight fit, good solid seam, good solid shoulder. That's what I want to see on a mortise and tenon. That's happy. A lot of people talk about dovetails, and the quality of your dovetail and your woodworking can be told by your dovetails. And yeah, if you're good at woodworking, you're going to have good dovetails. However, I have to say, the simple mortise and tenon is probably the more difficult one to master. And if you can do this, you can do any other joint out there. There are a lot that look really fancy and really complicated, but this is the joint that you need to master first. You get this done and all of the others suddenly make sense. All of the steps that are needed to make almost any other joint out there are in this. The mortise and tenon is the key woodworking joint because most everything else out there is a mortise and tenon. Yeah, okay, you've got half laps, which are basically like both mortise and tenon on the same thing, but everything else is a mortise and tenon. Now we've got the basics done. Mortise and tenon, this is a really great start. But there are hundreds of other joints out there that are a lot of fun, and they all have their own purposes and places and things that they do well. But if you have to spend your time on one thing, master this first. I hope you like this. If there is some joint you'd like me to try or to show off, let me know that down in the comments down below. I do read through all of them and I answer as many as I can, and I do get a lot of my video ideas from that. So if there's something you'd like to see, let me know that down there. Also, I do want to say, if you want to help out, there's also the little like button down there. Really, really helps. Thank you. Sharing, subscribing, thank you. Oh, and look, all those people over there, they're patrons on Patreon who are helping this channel out. Without patrons and members, this channel wouldn't be here. All of the people over here, they're patrons. People who've clicked the join button, they're members. And without you guys, this channel wouldn't exist. So thank you for keeping the lights on. If you'd like to find out more about that, there's a link to Patreon down in the description below, or click the little join button and become a member here on YouTube. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Tip number: divide by 0.